I'm back with more Big Bang Theory, and today I'm going to be taking a look at The Big Bang Theory Season 2, Episode 20, The Hofstadter Isotope. This episode starts off with the guys all having dinner in the apartment. They are having Thai food, which is causing Sheldon some distress because this is not their normal meal for Thursday night. But Leonard reveals that they have decided that every third Thursday of the month is going to become Anything Can Happen Thursday, and Howard says this is to get them out of the slump they've been in, which Sheldon reminds them is not a slump, is consistency. Sheldon, however, getting into the idea in his own way, suggests that they go to the comic book store that night, even though they had previously gone to the comic book store the night before, which is the normal comic book release night on Wednesday. They would be going today on Anything Can Happen Thursday. Howard instead points out that Thursday is ladies' night at bars around the country, and that they could go to bars and try to pick up women. And they all seem a little skeptical of this until Howard points out that he has an equation that can formulate that there are plenty of women to pick up. He asks if they've ever heard of Drake's equation, which Sheldon of course has, and delights in quoting it to them in its entirety.
That estimates the odds of making contact with extraterrestrials by calculating the product of an increasingly restrictive series of fractional values, such as those stars with planets, and those planets likely to develop life. N equals R times FP times NE times FL times FI times FC times L.
Howard's equation is a lot simpler and a lot more self-serving, and just weird. But that's what we've come to expect from Howard at this point. But as this plan seems to be gaining a little bit of momentum, Leonard says, or they could just finish their Thai food and go to the comic book store, and they'll go to bars on the next Anything Can Happen Thursday. Way to procrastinate. As they are heading out of the apartment to go to the comic book store, we see Penny coming up the stairs, and Sheldon tells her they're going to the comic book store and says that she must be shocked because it's not Wednesday, they're going on a Thursday. Penny just goes along with it, but asks them to pick up a few comic books for her nephew's birthday party coming up, and Sheldon is, of course, difficult about this because he doesn't know what kind of comics her nephew likes to read or what he's into, and just basically gives her a lot of grief about it. She instead asks Leonard, and he says he'll take care of it, but Sheldon continues, and Leonard says, it'll be easier if you just come with us, so reluctantly, Penny decides to go with them to the comic book store. We next see them arriving at the comic book store, and as they enter, all the nerds in the comic book store gasp as a pretty girl has now entered their domain, and they are shocked to see this.
Aw, what a cute little store. Everybody's staring at me.
Penny puts on a shocked face and says that everybody's staring at her. Leonard says, don't worry, they're more scared of you than you are of them. And Penny says, very doubtful. Now, while this does create a funny moment in the show, I feel like this perpetuates the stereotype that only nerdy guys who are scared of women read comic books. And it also tries to make it seem like women don't also go into comic book stores to buy comic books unless they are too nerdy. Which I guess is one of the premises of this whole show. It just is drawn to a bit of an extreme point in this scene. It is also worth noting here that this is the first time we see the guys go to the comic book store. We've heard them mention it many times, but this is the first time that we see them inside the store. Penny tries to pick a comic book, but Sheldon is of course still being difficult, so Leonard takes her to help pick another one. And it is at this point that we are introduced to another character who becomes a mainstay in the show, and that is Stuart, the owner of the comic book store. This early version of Stuart is a little bit different from how he develops later in the show. He's a little more confident. He even jokes with Penny when he first meets her and seems to capture her attention a little bit. Meanwhile, Howard and Sheldon are looking through a stack of comics, and they both end up on the same one that they both need, and so they're had a standoff. Penny goes back over to talk to Stuart again, only to find that he had been drawing a picture of her. She's flattered by it, and Stuart is actually doing a great job talking to Penny and kind of flirting with her a little bit. And even manages to get her phone number in exchange for the picture, much to Leonard's dismay. Sheldon does end up winning the comic book, because as Howard becomes distracted, he manages to snatch it out of his grip. Back at the apartment, Leonard is a bit dismayed. He's bothered by the fact that Penny seemed interested in Stuart, and he can't figure out what Stuart would have that he doesn't. Sheldon, meanwhile, is reading the comic book that he won from Howard, and is shocked that Leonard turned off the TV during the Star Trek Deep Space Nine Trouble with Tribbles crossover episode. Leonard tries to get some advice from Sheldon, but when that's fruitless, decides to go look on the internet for strangers for help. Which works for Sheldon because that was his suggestion in the first place. The next day, it is Friday night, and Sheldon is relieved because after the nightmare that he viewed Anything Can Happen Thursday to be, it is now time for their typical Friday night of Chinese food and vintage video games. And as the group is headed into the apartment, Penny is coming out of hers, along with Stuart. Again, much to Leonard's dismay, because Penny and Stuart are going out on a date to an art opening where Stuart has a piece on exhibit. Leonard is in fact so dismayed by this that he decides to ask Howard to take him out to a bar with women. Howard is a little surprised, but very excited to do it, and tells them that he just needs to slip inside and take off his underwear first.
Okay. Let me
just go inside and slip off my underwear?
Now, at first you would think this might be a very creepy reason, but it's just the fact that he's wearing Aquaman underwear and he doesn't want to get caught with them, on the off chance that he manages to actually pick up a woman. And Leonard and Raj realize that they are probably in a similar situation. At the bar, they're sitting down to order drinks, and Raj is trying to order a series of complicated, kind of not very masculine drinks, and this causes Howard to abandon him, saying that it's now going to go from the Three Musketeers to that dynamic duo, and he tells Leonard his strategy, and that is not to talk to any women right away, let the lawyers and the jocks clear out the herd, and then to go after the old and the lame and the weak. Howard just never quite fails to just say something so very creepy and weird. We next see Penny and Stuart returning from their date, and it must have gone decently well. They're having fun talking as they come up the stairs, and Penny even invites Stuart in for coffee. And Stuart, being a little naive like the other guys on the show, thought she actually meant coffee, noting that it's a little late for him to be drinking coffee, and Penny even says, "Oh, you think coffee actually means coffee."
It's a little late for coffee, isn't it?
Oh, you think coffee means coffee? That is so sweet.
And again, we have to note that this is an extremely different version of Stuart, because somehow on this date, Stuart did well enough that it seemed like he actually had an opportunity here to hook up with Penny, something that would be unimaginable later in the show. Something that Leonard's been trying to do for a long time and has failed up to this point, and Stuart manages in one date to almost get the opportunity, only to get blocked by Sheldon. Sheldon hears them talking out in the hall and pops out to talk to Stuart and engages them in a discussion about Batman. And Stuart, being the owner of a comic book store, can't resist the opportunity, and they begin debating back and forth about who should be the next Batman if Batman were to remain dead as Bruce Wayne was at this current point in this comic book timeline. And then they both enter Penny's apartment after she finds the coffee to continue this conversation. Stuart just blew his chances of whatever was going to happen that night. Back at the bar, Howard and Leonard are still scouting out women while Raj is still ordering his drinks, and they finally hone in on some two that they're going to attempt to talk to, and Howard continues to tell Leonard his bad plans to try to pick up women, and they are pretty bad. We then bounce back to Penny's apartment, where Sheldon and Stuart have continued their debate about Batman, to the point where Stuart eventually gives in just because he says he's tired and wants to go to sleep. He goes to say goodbye to Penny, but she has fallen asleep on the couch, and Sheldon warns him not to wake her up because she will maul him like a rabid wolverine. So Stuart did squander an evening with Penny for an evening with Sheldon. And back at the bar, Leonard notes that none of Howard's tactics seem to be working, and Howard says that Leonard is weighing him down. He flies better solo. Leonard says fine, he'll wait here, and he should go ahead and try, and he does not. He instead says let's get Koothrappali and leave. When they go to get Koothrappali, he's at the bar making out with a woman, so he's the only one who had any success on this night. And we end the episode with Koothrappali waking up in bed with said woman. He seems a little distressed at first, but then settles down and relaxes. And that was The Big Bang Theory, Season 2, Episode 20, The Hofstadter Isotope. And I think this is a pretty solid episode of The Big Bang Theory. The main couple takeaways is, of course, we see Leonard still seeking Penny, and he is very jealous, especially when Stuart comes in and has success. That's the other main takeaway of this episode, is the introduction of Stuart. As I said earlier, Stuart becomes a mainstay in the show and becomes a regular recurring character, and even, you could say, close to a main character by the end of the show. His character goes through a lot of changes and development over time, and this early iteration is a very interesting and different one, again, being that he is much more confident and sure of himself than the later versions of Stuart that we'll see. Again, enough proof to that point is that he manages to actually get a date with Penny, and it went well enough that Penny was inviting him into her apartment for who knows what that could have led to, but his nerdy nature got the best of him, and he let Sheldon squander that opportunity for him. I would score this episode a solid 8 out of 10. Please let me know your thoughts on this episode in the comment section, and please be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment, and keep an eye out for the next video coming soon.